Hello, in this video I'd like to talk about the basics of Maple. So Maple is a computer algebra system. It can do anything a graphing calculator can do, but a whole lot more. In fact, it's a really powerful system, and we're just going to see the very basic elements of it today. But in other videos we'll get to see more of its power. So the first thing you'll notice is that you have a choice of what type of Maple file to open up. You can open up a document or a worksheet. The document is geared more for when you're trying to make a nice final product of some presentation where you want everything to look nice. For our purposes, we're interested more in just cranking through some calculations, at least for now. And so we're going to use the worksheet mode. So I'll click on worksheet. And just in case the font is a little small, I'm going to click on the magnify button here to make that a little bigger. The other thing that you'll notice immediately is that you have a choice between a font that looks like this. So if I just start typing, notice 4 plus 4, and I hit enter, that will evaluate the math, gives me 8. And if I did say 4 to the 4th, and I hit enter, then it gives me the answer. But the downside of this is that you don't actually know how I got that 4 in the exponent. Now, most of us know that if I hit Shift 6, then that gives me an exponent, and that's in fact what I did. But sometimes there's some downsides to not knowing what I typed, and sometimes there's also some other quirks of Maple where using this font can, although it looks better, looks nice, can cause some other snags. So for our purposes, I prefer a different font, a different input mode, I should say. And so if you go to Tools and click on Options, and then click on Display, and the very first one, Input Display, I'm going to toggle it to the other one. So in this case, Maple Notation. And if you apply globally, you only have to do this once, and then Maple will remember that choice for future days. So notice, so let me hit enter. So if I notice it hasn't changed anything here. So, but if I hit enter one more time and now I do 4 plus 4, notice I get a different font. It's more of a red font, a little clunkier looking. Doesn't look quite as nice, but the benefit of it for now anyway is that if I want you to type 4 to the 4th, you can see exactly what I typed to get it. And so so that's among other things is why I'm going to use this font in these videos. So for example, if I wanted to do something more ambitious like 4 to the 123rd power, notice Maple has no problem with that. In fact, if I wanted to go back up here and make an even bigger power, it still has no problem. So this is one nice thing about Maple, is it's not confined to a small like calculator display or a certain amount of precision. In fact, if I wanted to say, let's do the square root of 2, notice it just gives me a precise answer. Okay, so Maple is going to default to the precise value, so like a fraction, like 3/7. It's just going to give you 3/7. If you want the decimal approximation, you have a couple of options. One, you can just put a decimal somewhere in there, and sometimes that will work. All right, notice that gives me a decimal. But if you want more digits for some reason, then if you use the evalf command, all right, if you use the evalf command, then notice I get several digits after the decimal point for the square root of 2. And if I wanted even more, I could tell it that I want, say, 100 digits. It'll give me 100 digits. If I want 1,000 digits, it can give me 1,000 digits. So, so that's just something to be aware of, is that you do have more flexibility in what level of precision Maple gives you. Now, one thing to notice is that sometimes I use a semicolon, sometimes I don't. The reason why, generally speaking, I'll probably default to the semicolon is for future reference. It's just kind of a good habit, I think, although Maple clearly doesn't need it. But if for some reason you don't want to see the output, if you change that to a colon, then the output disappears. So it's still there, or it's still in Maple's memory, but it's just not showing. So sometimes that's a nice thing to be aware of. So what else? Let's say I wanted to define a variable. So let's say I want w to equal 5. And if I put the colon, then if I type w squared, then Maple still knows w is 5. So the colon doesn't actually change anything. If I wanted to define a function, I could also do that. Notice one thing to be careful of, though, when you're defining functions and variables, you need both the colon and the equal sign. If you just do, let me try a different variable. And since I want to insert a line here, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to hit insert a command prompt. So let's say I want to do q equals 5. And then let's say I want to insert another one here and do q squared. Then notice it doesn't know that q is 5. So when you're assigning a value to a variable, make sure you do the colon. Same thing for functions, but there's an extra step. Because it's a function of, say, x, I need a arrow here, or a minus sign and a greater than symbol. And let's say I want x squared. So now we can see that f of x is x squared. And so if I do f of 5, I get 25. If I want to plot f of x, I can certainly plot f of x. One thing about Maple is you only need to give it a domain, not a range. So for example, in this case, it kind of picks a nice range for us. If you don't like it, or if you want the axes to look a little different, you have a couple of options. One, you can click on the graph, and notice I have the option of overlaying a grid. In fact, you can even play around with some of these. I won't go into all of this, and just see what sort of features you can find. But one that's nice to be aware of is the one-to-one button squares up the axes, and so you get a little better feel for the true nature of this graph. Another option is that, and you can also change how the axes are presented. But another option for changing the range is I could add a y value and say do -5 to 5. And so now notice that's another way of squaring up the axes, but now I've lost part of my graph because it's outside of the range. So, or if you wanted to go up to 50 for some reason, then you can do that as well. So lots of options, and there's a lot more things. We can change the color. We can change a lot of, the look of the curve. And so if you are curious of what that might be, you can actually do question mark plot. And then that brings up this help screen. And you can scroll down and read all about the plot command. I find that sometimes the examples are as helpful as anything, so you can see kind of all sorts of graphs that Maple makes with various examples. And then if you want to see all the options, you can click on plot options, and then you can see these are all the various things you can change when plotting a graph. So there's a lot you can do. Again, we're not going to get into all that today, but it is nice to be aware of that this question mark and then the name of the command will give you lots of information. Another kind of shortcut feature to be aware of in Maple is there's a palette. So for instance, here if I wanted to say do the square root of 2 from the palette, then notice, oops, let me back up one. Let me start a new line here and then click the square root, replace the a with 2. And so again, I get the square root of 2, or if I wanted a pi, I could come down here to pi, and I get a pi. I could type in eval f if I wanted to see what the value of pi is. But I won't use the palette too much because again, you don't know what I've clicked on. If you're just seeing a document created by me, you don't know that I clicked on something. So for the most part, I will try to type everything that I do so you can you can follow along even if you just have a document and not a video that you're working from. One thing to be aware about pi is that if I try the same thing but I forget to capitalize the P, then it thinks you mean the letter pi, not the number pi. So the capitalization is important in Maple. So we don't use capitals too much in the basic commands, but for some things it does come up and is important. So be aware of that. Just to give a more concrete example, let's say we wanted to calculate how much it costs to drive a car 2,500 miles. So notice, what am I going to do here? I actually want all my lines on one prompt, so I'm actually going to hit Shift Enter. So you can't see that I hit the shift, so just be aware of that. So MPG, let's say, is 35, and let's say price is 329. And then the cost, of course, is just miles divided by MPG times price. And we get $235. Notice I only outputted the MPG because that's the only one that had the semicolon. If I wanted all of this in one cell, notice you can use F3 and F4 to merge or separate cells. So F3 separates, right? But F4 merges. So if I merge them all together, then notice I only have to enter one time and it evaluates all 4 cells, which means if I change one of these, say to like 15, then it's going to automatically change the MPG and the cost, the final answer. Let's say I wanted to do something different. I wanted to make a function. So if I try to reuse the same names as is, it might confuse Maple, or at least confuse myself of what's what. So it's good to reset the server. So notice if I hover over here, it says restart Maple server. Okay. So if I do that, and then just to illustrate the point, if I here and click W squared, notice it doesn't know that W is 5 anymore. So when you reopen a Maple file, if you shut it down and reopen it up, it's not going to remember anything. So you need to reevaluate everything. The quickest way to reevaluate everything is hit the triple exclamation point. Execute the entire worksheet. And notice that evaluates everything. I don't need the plots. And all the way down here to the bottom. Now, if for some reason, and I don't really recommend this, but just to illustrate the point, I'm going to actually restart the Maple server and then continue on. So here's what I'm going to do. And to remind myself that I did it, I'm actually going to put in a text box here. So Maple server restarted here. Okay, and then I'm going to put in another prompt. Okay, so let me make sure I actually do that. So now I'm going to define cost to be a function of miles, MPG, and price. So this is a multivariable function, 3 variables. That's why I put them in parentheses. And then I'm just going to use the same formula as before. Copy and paste. And so now if I wanted to calculate the cost of driving 2,500 miles at 35 MPGs at 329 a gallon, I can just evaluate it like any other multivariable function. The nice thing about doing it like this is that then if I wanted to plot, say, cost of 2,500, I want my variable, let's say, to be MPG. Oops. I want my price to still be 329. And I want my MPGs to run from 10 to 60. Then I get a plot. And if I wanted to do a 3-dimensional plot, I could do a plot 3D. And let's say we want the price of gas to also be And so I could let my price run from $2 to $5. And so then we can get a surface here that shows us how much variation there is in the expense of this trip. It could go anywhere from $1,200 down to maybe $100 for this trip, depending on these two parameters. So anyway, so that gives you an idea of the very simplest parts of Maple. Thanks for listening.